In the sprawling corridors of Westfield Academy in Phoenix, Arizona, 17-year-old Maya Chun moved through the halls like a shadow, her small frame barely registering among the sea of students rushing between classes. Her jet-black hair hung in loose waves around her shoulders, often serving as a curtain she could hide behind when the attention became too much. Maya had perfected the art of invisibility over her 3 years at Westfield, but today, that carefully constructed shield was about to shatter in the most unexpected way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What started as another ordinary Tuesday morning would end with 3 of the school's most feared bullies gasping for air, their eyes wide with shock and terror as Maya's hands moved with deadly precision around their throats. The quiet girl who had never spoken above a whisper in class had just revealed a secret that would change everything at Westfield Academy forever. Maya's story began long before that fateful morning in the quiet suburbs of Scottsdale, where she lived with her grandmother, Alina Chun, in a modest 2-story house with a carefully maintained garden. Elena was a woman of few words but deep wisdom, her weathered hands telling stories of a life filled with both triumph and tragedy. She had raised Maya since the girl was 7 years old, after a car accident claimed both of Maya's parents on a rainy December night. The transition from her family's bustling household to her grandmother's quiet home had been jarring for young Maya. Where once there had been laughter and constant chatter, now there was only the soft sound of Elena's slippers against hardwood floors and the gentle hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. Maya had withdrawn into herself during those early years, finding solace in books and the small garden behind their house where she would spend hours tending to the vegetables her grandmother grew. Elena Chun carried secrets of her own, secrets that Maya wouldn't discover until much later. Born in Taiwan, Elena had immigrated to the United States as a young woman, bringing with her not just hopes and dreams, but a lifetime of training in martial arts that few in their quiet neighborhood could have imagined. She had been a formidable practitioner of various fighting disciplines, including Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Krav Maga, skills she had acquired during a turbulent period in her homeland, when such knowledge meant the difference between life and death. But Elena had never spoken of these abilities to Maya, choosing instead to let her granddaughter find her own path through grief and adjustment. She watched as Maya struggled with shyness and anxiety, her heart breaking each time she saw the young girl shrink away from social situations or return from school with tears threatening to spill from her dark eyes. Elena knew that Maya possessed an inner strength that she had yet to discover, but she also understood that some lessons could only be learned when the student was ready to receive them. Maya's first year at Westfield Academy had been relatively peaceful. She had managed to blend into the background, earning decent grades and avoiding the attention of the various social groups that dominated the school's hierarchy. She ate lunch alone in the library, completed her assignments with quiet diligence, and walked home each day without incident. It was a lonely existence, but it was safe, and safety had become Maya's primary concern after years of feeling vulnerable and exposed. The trouble began in her sophomore year, when she caught the attention of Brianna Walsh, a junior with striking red hair and a reputation for cruelty that extended far beyond the walls of Westfield Academy. Brianna came from one of Phoenix's wealthiest families, her father a prominent real estate developer who had built half the shopping centers in the city. This background had given Brianna a sense of entitlement and power that she wielded like a weapon against anyone she perceived as weak or different. Brianna's crew consisted of 2 other girls who orbited around her like planets around a sun, drawn by her charisma and terrified of becoming targets themselves. Madison Torres was a tall, athletic girl whose family had moved to Phoenix from California, bringing with them a laid-back attitude that masked a deep-seated insecurity about fitting in. She had attached herself to Brianna early in the school year, Recognizing that alliance meant protection from the social predators that prowled Westfield's halls. The third member of their group was Samantha Kim, a petite girl whose innocent appearance belied a sharp tongue and an even sharper intellect. She served as Brianna's strategist, identifying weaknesses and potential targets and devising elaborate schemes to exploit them. Samantha's parents were both doctors who worked long hours at the local hospital, leaving her with plenty of unsupervised time to perfect her skills in psychological warfare. Maya had first appeared on their radar during a chemistry class where she had quietly corrected a mistake that Brianna had made during a presentation. The correction had been offered gently, with no malice intended, but Brianna had felt the sting of public embarrassment in front of her classmates. That moment had marked Maya as a target, though she remained blissfully unaware of the danger she had placed herself in. The campaign against Maya began subtly, as these things often do. Her textbooks would mysteriously disappear from her locker, forcing her to share with classmates or go without during lessons. Her lunch would be accidentally knocked to the floor as she carried her tray to her usual corner table in the library. Anonymous notes would appear in her locker, containing cruel observations about her appearance or social status. Maya endured these small humiliations with the same quiet resilience she had shown in dealing with her parents' death. She purchased backup textbooks with her meager allowance, learned to eat lunch in the bathroom when necessary, and threw away the notes without reading them completely. She told herself that if she didn't react, the attention would eventually fade and she could return to her carefully constructed invisibility. But Brianna Walsh was not the type of person to lose interest in a victim who failed to provide adequate entertainment. If anything, Maya's stoic response to their initial attacks only served to intensify Brianna's determination to break her. The campaign escalated gradually, each incident designed to push Maya a little further toward her breaking point. The first physical confrontation occurred on a Thursday afternoon in late October. Maya was walking to her locker after her last class when she found Brianna and her crew waiting for her, their faces arranged in expressions of mock concern. Madison blocked the path to the left while Samantha covered the right, effectively trapping Maya in the narrow corridor between the lockers and the wall. "Maya, sweetie," Brianna said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "we've been worried about you. You always look so sad and lonely. Maybe you need some friends to help you feel better about yourself." Maya's instinct was to apologize and try to slip past them, but something in Brianna's tone made her pause. There was a predatory quality to the girl's smile that reminded Maya of nature documentaries she had watched with her grandmother, scenes of lions stalking gazelles across the African savanna. She realized that any sign of weakness would only encourage further aggression. "I'm fine, thank you," Maya said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying a note of firmness that surprised all four girls. Brianna's smile faltered for just a moment before returning with renewed intensity. "Oh, but you're not fine. Are you? I mean, look at you. Those clothes, that hair, the way you skulk around like you're ashamed to exist. We could help you with all of that, you know. Give you a makeover, introduce you to some nice people." The offer was clearly meant to be humiliating, a setup for some elaborate prank that would provide entertainment for Brianna's social media followers. Maya understood this instinctively, but she also recognized something else in the exchange. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of anger burning in her chest, a hot coal of resentment that she had been suppressing for far too long. "I said I'm fine," Maya repeated, her voice slightly stronger this time. Brianna's eyes narrowed and the pretense of friendliness evaporated completely. "No, you're not fine. You're pathetic. You're nobody who thinks she's better than everyone else because she gets good grades and keeps her mouth shut. But you know what? We see right through you." The confrontation might have ended there, with Maya retreating to lick her wounds and Brianna claiming victory, but Madison chose that moment to escalate the situation. perhaps emboldened by her leader's aggression, or maybe simply bored with the verbal sparring. She reached out and grabbed a handful of Maya's hair, yanking her head back with enough force to make her stumble. The pain was sharp and immediate, but it was nothing compared to the rage that exploded through Maya's consciousness like a dam bursting. Every slight, every humiliation, every moment of loneliness and fear crystallized into a single burning desire to fight back. But even as the fury consumed her, another part of her mind remained perfectly calm, observing the situation with clinical detachment. This was the part of Maya that had been shaped by years of living with Elena Chun, absorbing lessons that she hadn't even realized she was learning. Hours spent in the garden, listening to her grandmother's stories about resilience and strength. Quiet evenings watching old martial arts films together, Elena pointing out techniques and philosophies that Maya had filed away without understanding their significance. Maya didn't strike back that day. Instead, she carefully extracted herself from Madison's grip and walked away, her face burning with embarrassment, but her mind racing with new possibilities. She had felt something in that moment of contact, a knowledge of leverage and balance that seemed to come from nowhere. It was as if her body had remembered something her conscious mind had forgotten. That evening, Maya sat in her grandmother's kitchen, picking at her dinner and wrestling with questions she didn't know how to ask. Elena watched her granddaughter with knowing eyes, recognizing the signs of a young woman standing at a crossroads. "You had trouble at school today," Elena said quietly, not making it a question. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "Some troubles can be avoided," Elena continued, "but others must be faced. The wisdom is in knowing which is which." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, Maya found the courage to speak. "Grandma, were you ever scared when you were my age?" Elena's smile was sad but warm. "Every day, little one. But I learned that fear is not the enemy. Fear is information. It tells us when we need to be careful, when we need to be strong, when we need to be smart. The enemy is letting fear make our choices for us." Maya went to bed that night with her grandmother's words echoing in her mind, but she had no way of knowing that her troubles at school were just beginning. Brianna Walsh was not the type of person to forget a slight, and Maya's defiance, however small, had been noted and marked for future retribution. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning brought a new level of harassment. Maya's locker had been vandalized. Overnight, crude words scrawled across the metal surface in permanent marker. Her teachers, overwhelmed with their own responsibilities, either didn't notice or chose not to see the obvious signs of bullying. Maya cleaned the graffiti as best she could and went to class, but she could feel the eyes of her classmates following her movements, some sympathetic, others merely curious about the drama unfolding in their midst. The pattern continued for weeks. Each day brought new humiliations, each incident carefully calculated to stay just below the threshold that would trigger official intervention. Brianna and her crew had perfected the art of plausible deniability, always ready with innocent explanations for their behavior and witnesses who would corroborate their stories. Maya's grades began to suffer as she struggled to concentrate on her studies. Her sleep became fitful, filled with dreams of confrontation and violence that left her exhausted and confused. She found herself avoiding areas of the school where she might encounter Brianna's group, taking longer routes between classes and skipping lunch entirely on days when the cafeteria felt too dangerous. But even as her external circumstances deteriorated, something inside Maya was changing. The anger that had flared during that first confrontation had not disappeared. Instead, it had transformed into something more focused and purposeful. She began to pay attention to her body in ways she never had before, noticing how her muscles moved, how her balance shifted, how her breathing changed under stress. One evening, as she helped her grandmother tend to the garden, Maya found herself asking questions about Elena's youth in Taiwan, about the stories she had heard in fragments over the years. Elena answered some of these questions directly, but others she deflected with the gentle skill of someone who had learned to protect certain truths until the time was right to reveal them. "Why do you ask about such things, little one?" Elena inquired as they worked together to harvest the late tomatoes. "I feel like there's something I need to know," Maya said, struggling to put her feelings into words. "Like there's a part of me that's been sleeping, and now it's starting to wake up." Elena nodded slowly, her weathered hands pausing in their work. "Some knowledge comes when we seek it, and some comes when we need it. The trick is being ready to receive it when it arrives." Maya didn't understand what her grandmother meant, but she filed the words away with all the other cryptic wisdom Elena had shared over the years. She had no way of knowing that her education was about to take a dramatic turn, or that the skills she would soon discover within herself would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. As November arrived and the Arizona heat finally began to moderate, the situation at Westfield Academy reached a boiling point. Brianna's campaign against Maya had attracted the attention of other students, some of whom began to take sides in the conflict. A few brave souls attempted to befriend Maya, but she was too suspicious and wounded to accept their overtures easily. School's administration remained largely oblivious to the drama unfolding in their halls. Their attention focused on standardized test scores and budget meetings. The few teachers who noticed the signs of bullying were either too overwhelmed to intervene effectively or too cynical to believe that their efforts would make a difference. Maya found herself increasingly isolated, caught between her desire to fade into the background and her growing awareness that invisibility was no longer an option. Brianna had marked her as a target, and there would be no peace until the conflict was resolved one way or another. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in mid-November, when Maya arrived at school to find her locker had been broken into once again. This time, however, the vandalism was more personal and more cruel. Her few cherished possessions had been destroyed or stolen, including a small jade pendant that had belonged to her mother. The loss of the pendant hit Maya like a physical blow. It was one of the few tangible connections she had to her parents, and she had worn it every day since their death. The idea that someone had taken it, possibly thrown it away or destroyed it out of pure malice, filled her with a rage that threatened to consume her entirely. For the first time in months, Maya felt the urge to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, she stood in front of her violated locker, her hands shaking with suppressed fury, and made a decision that would change her life forever. She was done being a victim. She was done hiding. Whatever happened next, she would face it with strength rather than fear. As she walked to her first class that morning, Maya carried herself differently. Her shoulders were straighter, her chin higher, her eyes focused ahead rather than on the floor. She didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew that the girl who had spent 3 years trying to be invisible was gone forever. The confrontation that would shock the entire school was still hours away, but Maya Chun had already begun her transformation from victim to warrior. In the depths of her genetic memory, skills passed down through generations of survivors were beginning to stir, waiting for the moment when they would be needed most. The stage was set for a showdown that would leave 3 bullies gasping for air and one quiet girl standing tall in the aftermath of her awakening. The bell for third period echoed through the corridors of Westfield Academy as Maya made her way toward the science wing, her footsteps more deliberate than they had been. In months, the loss of her mother's jade pendant had awakened something primal within her, a fierce protectiveness that extended beyond material possessions to encompass her very sense of self. She moved through the crowded hallway with a new awareness, her peripheral vision sharp and alert for any sign of trouble. Brianna, Welsh had been tracking Maya's movements since the first period. noting the subtle changes in her target's demeanor with the keen eye of a predator sensing wounded prey. There was something different about the way Maya carried herself today, a tension in her shoulders and a set to her jaw that suggested the quiet girl might finally be ready to provide the dramatic confrontation that Brianna craved without the opportunity. Presented itself as Maya approached the stairwell leading to the chemistry lab on the second floor. The area was momentarily deserted, most students having already reached their destinations for the third period. Brianna signaled to Madison and Samantha with a subtle gesture, and the three girls moved to intercept Maya at the base of the stairs. Well, Brianna's voice cut through the relative quiet of the hallway, her tone carrying a false sweetness that immediately put Maya on guard. If it isn't our little wallflower, looking almost confident today. Did someone finally teach you how to stand up straight? Maya paused on the bottom step, her hand gripping the metal railing as she turned to face her tormentors. The positioning was strategic, whether by instinct or design, giving her the higher ground and a clear view of all three girls. Her grandmother's words about fear being information echoed in her mind, and she found herself analyzing the situation with a clarity that surprised her. "I need to get to class," Maya said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. Madison stepped closer, blocking Maya's path up the stairs. "Oh, but we need to talk to you about something important. It seems like someone broke into your locker this morning." "That's terrible, isn't it? So much crime in schools these days." The mock sympathy in Madison's voice was even more grating than Brianna's usual cruelty, and Maya felt her newfound composure beginning to crack. She could see the barely contained glee in all three faces, the satisfaction they took in her obvious distress over the violated locker and missing pendant. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Maya asked, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but carrying an edge that made Samantha take an involuntary step backward. Brianna laughed, a sound like breaking glass in the empty hallway. "Are you accusing us of something? That's a serious allegation, Maya. You better be careful about making accusations you can't prove." The gaslighting was expertly executed, designed to make Maya doubt her own perceptions and retreat into the familiar safety of silence. For 3 years, this tactic had worked perfectly, keeping Maya isolated and compliant. But today, something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic between predator and prey. "I know it was you," Maya said, each word precise and deliberate. "I know you took my mother's necklace, and I want it back." The admission hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Maya could see the excitement building in Brianna's eyes. This was the reaction she had been working toward for months. The moment when her victim would finally break and provide the dramatic confrontation that would make excellent content for social media. "Your mother's necklace?" Brianna's voice dripped with feigned concern. "Oh, that little piece of junk? I'm sorry to tell you this, Maya, but I threw it in the trash where it belonged, just like everything else about you." The words hit Maya like a physical blow, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to a single point of white-hot rage. The pendant had been more than jewelry. It had been her last tangible connection to a mother who had died too young, a talisman that had helped her navigate the darkest moments of her grief. To hear it described as junk, to know it had been discarded like garbage, unleashed something savage within her. But even as the fury threatened to overwhelm her, another part of Maya's mind remained eerily calm, observing the situation with detached precision. She noticed how Madison had positioned herself to block retreat, how Samantha was already pulling out her phone to record whatever happened next, how Brianna's body language suggested she was preparing for Maya to either cry or flee. None of them expected what happened instead. Maya's voice, when she spoke, was quiet but carried a quality that made all three girls pause. "You made a mistake." Before anyone could react, the confrontation escalated beyond words. "Madison, perhaps sensing that the psychological warfare wasn't having its desired effect, decided to add a physical component to their intimidation. She reached out to shove Maya backward down the stairs, intending to humiliate her with a fall that would be captured on Samantha's phone and shared throughout the school before the period ended. The moment Madison's hands made contact with Maya's shoulders, something extraordinary happened. Maya's body moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy physics, her arms coming up to break Madison's grip, while simultaneously stepping forward into the attack rather than away from it. The movement was instinctive, pulled from some deep wellspring of knowledge that Maya hadn't even known she possessed. Madison found herself off balance, her momentum redirected by Maya's subtle shift in position. But the real shock came when Maya's hands moved to Madison's throat with surgical precision, her fingers finding pressure points that made the larger girl's eyes widen in sudden panic. It wasn't a violent grab, but rather a controlled application of force that suggested knowledge of anatomy and physiology far beyond what any high school student should possess. "Let go of me," Madison gasped, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, the pressure on her throat making it difficult to speak. Brianna and Samantha stared in stunned silence as Maya held Madison in place with what appeared to be minimal effort. The quiet girl they had been tormenting for months had transformed into something completely unexpected, her movements displaying a competence and control that spoke of serious training. "Maya, what are you doing?" Samantha's voice cracked with genuine fear as she watched her friend struggle unsuccessfully against Maya's grip. Maya's eyes, when they met Samantha's, were cold and focused in a way that made this smaller girl take several steps backward. "I'm teaching her about consequences," Maya said, her voice unnaturally calm given the circumstances. The demonstration lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity to Madison, who found herself completely helpless in Maya's grasp. When Maya finally released her, Madison stumbled backward, her hands flying to her throat as she gasped for air. The experience had been more psychological than physical, but the message was unmistakable. Maya was not the helpless victim they had believed her to be. "You're crazy," Madison wheezed, her voice hoarse from the brief constriction of her airway. "I'm telling Principal Harrison about this." But even as she made the threat, Madison was backing away from Maya, her body language betraying the fear that her words tried to disguise. Brianna and Samantha flanked her, their own confidence shaken by what they had witnessed. Maya remained perfectly still on the stairs, her breathing steady and controlled despite what had just occurred. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her system, but it was different from the panic-induced rush she had experienced during previous confrontations. This felt controlled, purposeful, like a tool she could access when needed rather than a chaotic flood that overwhelmed her senses. "You want to tell Principal Harrison?" Maya's voice carried a note of challenge that made all three girls freeze. "Go ahead. Tell him how three of you cornered one girl in an empty hallway. Tell him about the broken locker, the stolen necklace, the months of harassment you've documented on your phones. I'm sure he'd be very interested in reviewing all that evidence." The threat was delivered with the same calm precision as everything else Maya had done, and its effectiveness was immediate. Brianna's face flushed red as she realized how thoroughly their campaign of bullying had been documented, how easily their own social media posts could be turned against them in any official investigation. "This isn't over," Brianna snarled, but there was less conviction in her voice than usual. "No," Maya agreed, her eyes never leaving Brianna's face. "It's not. But the next time you decide to escalate things, you might want to consider whether you're prepared for the consequences." With that, Maya turned and continued up the stairs toward her chemistry class, leaving three shaken bullies in her wake. Her movements were fluid and confident, showing no trace of the anxiety that had plagued her for so long. It was as if the brief confrontation had awakened something that had been dormant within her, some genetic memory of strength and capability that her conscious mind was only beginning to understand. The trio watched her go in stunned silence. Their entire perception of Maya Chun shattered in the span of a few minutes. Madison's throat still ached from the controlled pressure Maya had applied, and the memory of those cold, focused eyes would haunt her for weeks to come. What the hell was that? Samantha whispered, her phone forgotten in her hand. Brianna's jaw was clenched tight as she watched Maya disappear around the corner. Her carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare had just backfired spectacularly, revealing that her chosen victim possessed capabilities none of them had suspected. Worse still, Maya's threat about their documented harassment was not an empty one. Months of posts, videos, and messages could easily be traced back to them if Maya decided to pursue official channels. She got lucky, Brianna said finally, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Madison just wasn't expecting her to fight back. Madison shot her a venomous look. Lucky? Did you see how she moved? That wasn't luck, Brianna. That was training. Real training. The implications of Madison's words settled over them like a dark cloud. If Maya had been hiding martial arts skills all this time, it meant their entire assessment of the situation had been wrong from the beginning. They had been bullying someone who could have defended herself at any time, someone who had chosen restraint until they pushed her too far. We need to be smart about this, Samantha said, her analytical mind already working through the potential consequences. If she really does have training, and if she reports what we've been doing. She won't report anything, Brianna interrupted, but there was uncertainty in her voice. She's too scared of making waves. She'll go back to being invisible, and will pretend this never happened. But even as she spoke the words, Brianna knew they weren't true. The girl who had just controlled Madison with surgical precision was not the same person who had endured months of harassment in silence. Something fundamental had changed in Maya Chun, and there would be no going back to the old dynamic. Meanwhile, Maya sat through her chemistry class in a state of heightened awareness, her mind processing what had just occurred. The techniques she had used on Madison had felt natural, almost instinctive, as if her body had remembered something her conscious mind had forgotten. The pressure points, the leverage, the control, all of it had flowed from some deep well of knowledge that she couldn't explain. As the teacher droned on about molecular structures, Maya found herself examining her hands, these instruments that had just demonstrated capabilities she didn't remember learning. Her grandmother's face flashed through her mind, along with fragments of half-remembered conversations about strength and resilience. For the first time, Maya began to wonder what other secrets Elena Chun might be keeping. The rest of the school day passed in a haze of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Word of the stairwell confrontation had spread with the supernatural speed that only high school gossip could achieve, growing and mutating with each retelling. By lunch, Maya had supposedly thrown Madison down an entire flight of stairs. By the final bell, she had single-handedly taken on the entire football team. Maya ignored the attention, but she couldn't ignore the change in how people looked at her. Where once there had been pity or indifference, now there was curiosity and, in some cases, respect. Students who had witnessed her months of silent suffering were struggling to reconcile that image with the girl who had effortlessly controlled one of the school's most aggressive bullies. But the most significant change was in Maya herself. As she walked home that afternoon, she carried herself with a confidence that felt both foreign and familiar. The victim mentality that had defined her for so long was being replaced by something stronger, something that whispered of hidden strengths and untapped potential. Elena Chun was waiting in the garden when Maya arrived home, her weathered hands busy with the late autumn pruning that would prepare their plants for winter. She looked up as her granddaughter approached, and Maya saw something in her grandmother's eyes that suggested Elena already knew something significant had happened. "How was school today, little one?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the gentle probing of someone who sensed important news. Maya hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain what had occurred without revealing the extent of the bullying she had endured. "Different," she said finally. "Something happened today that made me realize I might be stronger than I thought." Elena's hands stilled in their work, and she studied Maya's face with the intensity of someone reading a language written in micro-expressions and subtle cues. "Strength comes in many forms," she said carefully. "Some we must discover for ourselves, and some are given to us by those who came before." The cryptic response was typical of Elena's communication style, but today Maya heard something different. In the words, a hint that her grandmother might possess answers to questions Maya was only beginning to formulate. "Grandma," Maya said, settling beside Elena among the garden rows, "were you ever in a situation where you had to defend yourself?" Elena's smile was sad but proud as she looked at her granddaughter. "Many times, little one. The world can be a dangerous place for those who appear vulnerable. But appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing when to reveal what you're truly capable of." As the sun set over Phoenix, casting long shadows across the garden where grandmother and granddaughter worked side by side, Maya felt the first stirrings of understanding. The confrontation with Madison had been more than just a moment of self-defense. It had been an awakening to possibilities she had never considered. The girl who had walked into Westfield Academy that morning as a victim was gone forever, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand that she carried within her the potential for something far more powerful. The question was no longer whether she could defend herself, but whether she was ready to discover the full extent of what that defense might entail. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new confrontations, and new revelations about the depths of her hidden capabilities. But tonight, Maya Chun sat in her grandmother's garden and felt the stirrings of a transformation that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. The incident on the stairs had been just the beginning. That evening, as the desert air cooled and the first stars appeared over Phoenix, Maya found herself unable to concentrate on her homework. The events of the day replayed in her mind like scenes from a movie, each detail sharp and vivid. The way her hands had moved without conscious thought, the precise application of pressure that had brought Madison to her knees, the feeling of absolute control in a moment that should have been chaotic, all of it pointed to knowledge she didn't remember acquiring. Elena Chun moved through their modest home with her usual quiet grace, preparing dinner while humming an old Taiwanese melody that Maya had heard countless times but never fully understood. Tonight, however, the familiar tune seemed to carry weight, as if it were a key to unlocking mysteries that had been hidden in plain sight for years. "Grandma," Maya said, setting aside her calculus textbook and joining Elena in the kitchen, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Elena's hands paused in their chopping of vegetables, her weathered fingers resting on the wooden cutting board. In the soft light of the kitchen, Maya could see faint scars across her grandmother's knuckles, marks she had always assumed came from years of gardening and household work. Now she found herself wondering if there might be another explanation. "Honesty is a gift that must be given when the receiver is ready to accept it," Elena said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone navigating treacherous emotional territory. Maya pulled out a chair at the small kitchen table, positioning herself where she could study her grandmother's face. "Today at school, something happened. When someone tried to hurt me, I defended myself in a way that surprised everyone, including me. I knew exactly where to apply pressure, how to control someone's movement, techniques I've never learned. How is that possible?" Elena set down her knife and turned to face her granddaughter fully, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and apprehension. For a long moment, she said nothing, as if weighing the consequences of the conversation they were about to have. "Sit down, little one," Elena said finally, settling into the chair across from Maya. "It is time you learned about the women who came before you and why you carry their strength in your bones." The story that Elena began to tell that night would rewrite everything Maya thought she knew about her family, her heritage, and herself. It started not in the quiet suburbs of Phoenix, but in the mountains of Taiwan during the turbulent decades of the mid-20th century, when political upheaval and foreign occupation had turned the island into a proving ground for those who would survive and those who would not. Elena's grandmother, Maya's great-great-grandmother, had been born into a family of healers who practiced traditional Chinese medicine in a remote mountain village. But the political chaos of the era had forced them to develop skills beyond herbal remedies and acupuncture. When bandits and soldiers swept through their region, targeting anyone they perceived as vulnerable, the women of the family had learned to defend not only themselves, but their entire community. She was called the Iron Butterfly, Elena said, her voice taking on the cadence of ancient storytelling. Li Mei Chun could heal a broken bone with her hands, but she could also break one with equal precision. She taught these skills to her daughters, who taught them to theirs, passing down not just techniques but an understanding of the human body that went beyond what any textbook could contain. Maya listened in fascination as Elena described a lineage of women who had mastered what she called the gentle arts, martial disciplines that emphasized control over destruction, precision over power. They were healers first and fighters only when necessary, but when violence found them, they were more than capable of defending themselves and their loved ones. Your great-grandmother Chen Li Hua refined these techniques during the Japanese occupation, Elena continued. She developed methods of subduing attackers without causing permanent damage, ways of controlling opponents through pressure points and nerve manipulation that left no visible marks. In a time when women were considered helpless, she and her sisters moved through dangerous territory with confidence, knowing they carried protection that no weapon could provide. The techniques had been passed down through generations, Elena explained, each woman adding her own innovations and improvements to the family's martial knowledge. But always, the emphasis remained on discretion and restraint. These were not skills meant for public display or sporting competition. They were tools of survival, to be used only when all other options had been exhausted. And my grandmother? Maya asked, already beginning to understand where the story was leading. Elena's expression grew more complex, shadows of old pain mixing with fierce pride. Your grandmother, Grace Chun, my daughter and your mother, was perhaps the most gifted of us all. She could read a person's intentions in their posture, detect aggression before it became action, neutralize threats with movements so subtle that observers might think her attacker had simply lost their balance. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. Her mother, the gentle woman she remembered from childhood, had been a martial artist. It seemed impossible to reconcile with her memories of bedtime stories and afternoon tea parties. But she never told me, Maya whispered. I never saw her practice, never saw any sign that she knew how to fight. Grace made a choice, Elena said, her voice heavy with old regret. When she married your father and moved to America, she wanted to leave the violence of our past behind. She believed that in this new country, with its laws and protections, our ancient skills would no longer be necessary. She refused to teach you what she knew, hoping you would never need such knowledge. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Her mother had possessed the same abilities that were now manifesting in Maya, but had chosen to keep them hidden. All those years when Maya had felt powerless and vulnerable, she had been carrying within her the genetic memory of generations of strong women who had never backed down from a fight. The car accident that killed your parents, Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper, it wasn't random. Grace had been investigating irregularities at the medical research facility where she worked, asking questions about experimental procedures that certain people didn't want answered. When she began to receive threats, she finally reached out to me, asking if I thought she should teach you our family's defensive techniques. Maya's hands clenched into fists as she absorbed the implications of what Elena was saying. You think they were murdered? I know they were, Elena said simply. But Grace was no longer the fighter she had been in her youth. Years of suppressing her training, of choosing peace over preparedness, had dulled her instincts. When the attack came, she was unable to protect herself or your father. The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Maya stared at her grandmother, her mind reeling as she tried to process everything she had learned. Her family's history, her mother's hidden abilities, the true circumstances of her parents' death. It was almost too much to absorb. Why didn't you tell me this before? Maya asked finally. Why let me suffer through years of feeling helpless when you knew I carried these capabilities? Elena reached across the table and took Maya's hands in her own, her weathered fingers, tracing the faint calluses that Maya had developed from years of helping in the garden. Because I respected your mother's wishes, and because I hoped you would never need such knowledge. But also because these skills cannot simply be taught through instruction. They must awaken naturally when the student is ready to receive them. And the situation demands their use. And you think I'm ready now? I think today proved that your body remembers what your mind has forgotten, Elena said. The techniques you used on that girl, the pressure point control, the leverage manipulation, those came from generations of accumulated knowledge encoded in your very DNA. You are beginning to access your birthright. Maya, but you must understand the responsibility that comes with such power. Elena rose from the table and disappeared into her bedroom, returning a few minutes later with a wooden box that Maya had seen on her grandmother's dresser, but had never been allowed to touch. Elena set the box on the table and opened it with reverent care, revealing contents that made Maya gasp in surprise. Inside were photographs of women in various fighting stances, their faces bearing the unmistakable Chun family features that Maya saw in her own mirror each morning. There were handwritten journals in Chinese characters, detailed anatomical drawings showing pressure points and nerve clusters, and most striking of all, a series of silk scrolls covered in elegant calligraphy that seemed to describe complex martial techniques. This is your inheritance, Elena said, her voice filled with solemnity. The accumulated knowledge of 6 generations of Chun women, preserved and refined through decades of necessity and practice. Your mother added her own innovations before she chose to step away from this legacy. Now it falls to you to decide whether you will embrace what you are, or continue to deny your true nature. Maya picked up one of the photographs with trembling hands. It showed a young woman who looked remarkably like her, dressed in traditional Chinese clothing, demonstrating what appeared to be a throwing technique on a much larger male opponent. The woman's face was calm and focused, showing no sign of strain despite the complexity of what she was executing. That is Li Mei, your great-great-grandmother, Elena said. She was barely 18 when that photograph was taken, but she had already mastered techniques that grown men feared to face. You have her eyes, and according to what happened today, you may have inherited more than just her appearance. As Maya examined the other contents of the box, Elena began to explain the philosophy that had guided their family's martial arts for generations. It was not about domination or aggression, but about balance and control. The ultimate goal was not to defeat an opponent, but to neutralize threats while preserving life and dignity for all involved. We are healers first, Elena said, echoing words that had been passed down through generations. We study the human body to understand how to fix what is broken, but that same knowledge allows us to break what needs breaking. The difference between a healer and a destroyer is not in the techniques they know, but in the wisdom with which they choose to apply that knowledge. Maya spent the next several hours poring over the contents of the box while Elena shared stories of their female ancestors. Each woman had faced her own challenges, adapted the family techniques to her own circumstances, and passed on improvements to the next generation. Maya began to understand that what had awakened in her that day was not just personal strength, but the culmination of generations of survival wisdom. The techniques you used today were elementary, Elena explained as she demonstrated basic pressure point locations on Maya's arm. Your body accessed the most basic defensive responses from our family's arsenal. But there is so much more you could learn if you choose to embrace this path. As the night deepened, Elena began teaching Maya the theoretical foundations of their family's martial arts. She explained how understanding energy flow through the human body could be used both to heal and to incapacitate, how leverage and timing could allow a small person to control someone much larger, how psychological pressure could be as effective as physical force in neutralizing threats. But you must promise me something, Elena said as they finally prepared to put the materials away. These techniques are not toys, and they are not weapons of aggression. They are tools of last resort, to be used only when your safety or the safety of others is genuinely threatened. The power to control another person's body comes with the responsibility to use that power wisely. Maya nodded solemnly, beginning to understand the weight of what she was inheriting. The abilities that had manifested during her confrontation with Madison were just the tip of an iceberg of knowledge that stretched back through generations of strong women who had refused to be victims. Tomorrow, Elena said, if you truly wish to understand your heritage, we will begin your formal training. But tonight, you should rest and let your mind process what you have learned. Change is never easy, little one, even when it leads us toward our true selves. As Maya prepared for bed that night, she found herself looking at her reflection with new eyes. The face staring back at her was the same one she had seen every morning for 17 years, but now she could see echoes of the women who had come before her. In the set of her jaw, she saw Li Mei's determination. In the focus of her eyes, she glimpsed her mother's hidden strength. The revelation of her family's secret had answered many questions, but it had also raised new ones. If her parents had indeed been murdered because of her mother's investigation, were there still people out there who might pose a threat? And more immediately, how would her newfound understanding of her capabilities affect her interactions at school? Maya fell asleep that night with her mother's jade pendant missing and her grandmother's martial arts manuals beside her bed. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one where she would finally begin to understand what it meant to be a Chun woman. The bullies at Westfield Academy had awakened something they couldn't possibly comprehend, and Maya was only beginning to discover the full extent of what that awakening might mean. In her dreams, she moved through ancient mountain villages, learning techniques from grandmothers she had never met, but whose knowledge flowed through her veins like ancestral memory. When she woke, her hands would remember movements she had never practiced, and her body would be ready to begin a training regimen that would transform her from victim to protector. The secret was out, at least between grandmother and granddaughter. Now the real education could begin. The Monday morning following Maya's confrontation with the three bullies brought an unprecedented silence to the halls of Westfield Academy. Word of what had transpired in the parking lot had spread through social media like wildfire over the weekend, with multiple cell phone videos capturing different angles of Maya's devastating display of martial arts mastery. By sunrise, the footage had been viewed thousands of times, shared across multiple platforms, and dissected frame by viewers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Maya arrived at school to find a completely transformed social landscape. Students who had ignored her for 3 years now stopped their conversations as she passed, their expressions ranging from awe to apprehension to genuine respect. The hallways that had once felt like a gauntlet of potential humiliation now seemed to part before her, creating clear paths wherever she chose to walk. Principal Harrison had spent the weekend fielding phone calls from parents, school board members, and local news outlets, all demanding answers about the martial arts incident that had occurred on school property. The cell phone footage clearly showed Brianna Walsh, Madison Torres, and their hired muscle Vince Romano attacking Maya first, making any disciplinary action against her legally and ethically complicated. Miss Chun, Principal Harrison's voice, crackled over the intercom during the first period. Please report to the main office. Maya gathered her belongings with the same calm composure she had maintained since her awakening began. Her classmates watched her departure with barely concealed fascination, whispering among themselves about the quiet girl who had single-handedly taken down 3 attackers with techniques that looked like something from an action movie. The main office buzzed with unusual activity. As Maya approached, she could see Principal Harrison through his glass door, gesticulating animatedly while speaking on the phone. Secretary Mrs. Rodriguez looked up from her computer with an expression that was equal parts confusion and admiration. "Go right in." "Honey," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice carrying a warmth that had never been present during Maya's previous visits to the office. "And between you and me, it's about time someone stood up to those bullies." Principal Harrison ended his phone call as Maya entered his office, his face a mask of professional neutrality that didn't quite hide his underlying bewilderment. On his desk lay several printed screenshots from the viral videos, each one capturing a different moment of Maya's defensive demonstration. "Miss Chun," he began, settling back in his chair, "I find myself in a rather unique situation. In 23 years of educational administration, I've never had to deal with anything quite like this." Maya remained silent, her posture straight but relaxed, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The girl who had once trembled in this same chair while being lectured about avoiding trouble was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came not from aggression but from absolute self-control. "The footage from Friday afternoon is remarkable," Principal Harrison continued, choosing his words carefully. "It clearly shows you defending yourself against multiple attackers, using what appear to be highly sophisticated martial arts techniques. Can you explain where you acquired such training?" "My family has a long tradition of self-defense," Maya replied, her voice steady and clear. "I was taught to protect myself and others when no other options remained." Principal Harrison nodded, slowly making notes on a legal pad. "The investigating officers have reviewed all available footage and witness statements. It's clear that you acted in self-defense against a coordinated attack. However, the effectiveness of your response has raised some concerns among parents and school board members." Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression curious but not defensive. "What kind of concerns?" "Some people are wondering if you might pose a danger to other students," Principal Harrison said, then quickly held up his hand as Maya's eyes flashed with momentary anger. "I want to be clear that I don't share these concerns. Your academic record and behavioral history suggests someone of exceptional character. But I need to ask, do you intend to use these abilities again?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that extended far beyond the walls of Westfield Academy. Maya considered her response carefully, drawing on the wisdom her grandmother had shared about the responsibility that came with their family's knowledge. "I hope I never have to use them again," Maya said finally. "But if someone threatens me, or other innocent people, I will do whatever is necessary to protect us." "That's not a threat, Principal Harrison. It's a promise." The honesty and maturity in Maya's response seemed to satisfy the principal, who made another note before setting aside his pen. "I've reviewed the disciplinary records for Miss Walsh, Miss Torres, and their associates. The pattern of harassment directed at you and other students has been well documented. Despite our previous failures to address it adequately," Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. It was the first time she had heard any school administrator acknowledge that the bullying problem had been mishandled. "Effective immediately," Principal Harrison continued. "Miss Walsh and Miss Torres have been suspended pending a full investigation into their conduct. Mr. Romano, as he is not a student here, has been banned from school property permanently. Furthermore, we're implementing a new anti-bullying protocol that will make such systematic harassment much more difficult to sustain." The irony was not lost on Maya that her decision to fight back had accomplished in one afternoon what years of suffering and silence had failed to achieve. But she also understood that the real victory was not in the punishment of her tormentors, but in her own transformation from victim to protector. "There's something else," Principal Harrison added, his tone becoming more personal. "Several students have approached me about starting a self-defense club. They've specifically requested that you be involved in its organization and instruction. Would you be interested in such a program?" Maya felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with her fighting abilities and everything to do with the possibility of helping others find their own strength. "I would be honored to help," she said. The rest of the week passed in a blur of new experiences for Maya. Students who had never spoken to her before approached with questions about martial arts, requests for self-defense advice, and simply to express their admiration for her courage. Teachers who had barely noticed her presence now engaged her in conversations about philosophy, conflict resolution, and the responsibilities that came with physical capabilities. Marcus Rivera, the junior who had been her training partner during those crucial weeks of preparation, became a frequent companion during lunch and free periods. Their friendship had been forged in the crucible of shared training, and Maya found herself genuinely enjoying social interaction for the first time in years. "I still can't believe what you did to those three," Marcus said as they sat together in the school courtyard, sharing stories and planning for the upcoming self-defense club. "The way you moved, it was like watching a completely different person." Maya smiled, remembering her grandmother's words about revealing one's true self when the situation demanded it. "I think I was always that person," she said. "I just needed to remember who I was." The Self-Defense Club held its first meeting the following Wednesday in the school gymnasium, with Maya and Marcus co-facilitating under the supervision of Coach Williams, a former military instructor who had volunteered to oversee the program. 23 students attended that first session, representing a cross-section of Westfield's social hierarchy that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. Maya began the session not with physical techniques, but with the philosophical foundations her grandmother had taught her. She explained the difference between aggression and self-defense, the importance of avoiding confrontation whenever possible, and the responsibility that came with knowledge of how to hurt others. "The goal is never to win a fight," Maya told the assembled students, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived these principles under fire. "The goal is to survive a threat and protect those who cannot protect themselves. Everything else is just ego." As the weeks passed, the Self-Defense Club became one of Westfield's most popular extracurricular activities. Maya found herself teaching not just physical techniques, but confidence, situational awareness, and the kind of mental strength that her family had cultivated for generations. Students who had been victims of bullying discovered their own power, while others learned to recognize and intervene when they witnessed harassment. The ripple effects extended far beyond the confines of the school. Local news outlets picked up the story of the teen martial arts prodigy who had transformed her school's culture through a combination of self-defense and leadership. Maya found herself invited to speak at community events, youth organizations, and even a regional conference on school violence prevention. Alina Chun watched her granddaughter's emergence into the public eye with a mixture of pride and concern. The family's martial arts had always been practiced in secrecy, passed down through generations of women who understood the importance of discretion. But Maya's very public demonstration had changed those dynamics forever. "Are you prepared for the attention this will bring?" Alina asked one evening as they worked together in the garden, maintaining the quiet ritual that had grounded them both through so many changes. Maya paused in her wedding, considering the question seriously. "I think about Mom sometimes," she said, "about how she chose to hide her abilities because she wanted a peaceful life. But maybe the real peace comes from being honest about who we are and using our gifts to help others." Elena's smile was soft but proud. Your mother made the choice that felt right for her time and circumstances. You are making the choice that feels right for yours. Both require courage, little one. The transformation of Westfield Academy's social dynamics proved to be lasting rather than temporary. The zero-tolerance anti-bullying policies that had been implemented in the wake of Maya's confrontation created an environment where systematic harassment became nearly impossible to sustain. Students who had previously suffered in silence found their voices, while those who had participated in bullying behavior discovered that their actions now carried real consequences. Brianna Walsh returned to school after her suspension defined her social empire in ruins. The videos of her humiliating defeat had destroyed her reputation for invincibility, while her followers had largely abandoned her during her absence. She made a few half-hearted attempts to reassert her dominance, but the changed atmosphere at Westfield made her old tactics ineffective. Madison Torres transferred to a private school across town, unable to face the daily reminder of her encounter with Maya's chokehold techniques. The memory of those few seconds when she had been completely helpless in Maya's grasp haunted her dreams and made it impossible for her to project the confidence that had once made her a formidable bully. Vince Romano found himself facing legal consequences for his assault on school property, with the viral videos providing incontrovertible evidence of his actions. The charges served as a stark reminder to other potential aggressors that violence against students would not be tolerated. But perhaps the most significant change was in Maya herself. The girl who had once moved through the halls like a ghost now walked with quiet confidence, her presence commanding respect without demanding attention. She had learned to balance her family's martial heritage with her own values of compassion and protection, creating a synthesis that honored the past while building toward a better future. 6 months after the parking lot confrontation, Maya stood before the assembled student body at Westfield Academy's annual awards ceremony, preparing to deliver the keynote address as the recipient of the newly created Community Leadership Award. The auditorium was packed not just with students and faculty, but with parents, community leaders, and representatives from colleges that had begun recruiting her based on her unique combination of academic excellence and leadership abilities. A year ago, Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. I thought strength meant being invisible, avoiding conflict, and hoping that if I made myself small enough, the world would leave me alone. I learned that real strength means standing up for yourself and others, even when it's scary, even when it's difficult, even when it changes everything about how people see you. She paused, her eyes finding Elena in the audience, the proud grandmother who had given her the keys to unlock her own potential. I learned that we all carry within us the accumulated wisdom and strength of those who came before us, Maya continued. Sometimes that inheritance is obvious, and sometimes it's hidden so deep we forget it exists. But when we need it most, when the moment comes to choose between being a victim or being a protector, that strength will be there waiting for us. The standing ovation that followed Maya's speech lasted nearly 5 minutes, but she found herself thinking not about the applause or the accolades, but about the responsibility she had inherited and the example she hoped to set for others. The Chun family legacy of protection and healing had found its newest guardian, and Maya was determined to honor that trust while building something even greater for the generations that would followed out as the ceremony concluded and Maya mingled with the crowd of well-wishers and supporters. She caught sight of a young freshman girl standing hesitantly at the edge of the crowd. The girl's posture and expression reminded Maya of herself a year earlier, uncertain, vulnerable, but with something deeper burning in her eyes. Maya excused herself from a conversation with college recruiters and approached the girl with the same gentle confidence that had become her trademark. "Hi," Maya said simply. "I'm Maya, what's your name?" "Jennifer," the girl replied quietly. "Jennifer Park. I wanted to thank you for what you've done here. The Self-Defense Club, the way You've changed things. It's made school a lot better for people like me." Maya smiled, recognizing in Jennifer the same spark that Elena had seen in her all those months ago. "Would you like to join the self-defense club? We're always looking for new members." Jennifer's face lit up with an expression of hope and determination. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that very much." As Maya walked home that evening, Jennifer's contact information safely stored in her phone and plans, already forming for the girl's introduction to the Chun family's philosophy of protection and empowerment. She felt a deep sense of completion. The cycle was beginning again, but this time Maya would be the teacher, the guardian, the bridge between ancient wisdom and modern challenges. The bullies who had grabbed her throat that day in the parking lot had intended to break her spirit and crush her resistance. Instead, they had awakened a protector who would spend the rest of her life ensuring that no one else would have to suffer in silence as she once had. Maya Chun had found her purpose, and Westfield Academy would never be the same. The legend of the quiet girl who had brought 3 bullies to their knees with chokehold techniques was already passing into school mythology, but the real story was just beginning. In classrooms and hallways, in gyms and community centers, a new generation of protectors was learning that true strength came not from the ability to inflict harm, but from the wisdom to prevent it and the courage to stand up when prevention failed. The transformation was complete, but the mission would continue for as long as there were victims who needed to become survivors, and survivors who needed to become protectors. Maya Chun, inheritor of 6 generations of martial wisdom and guardian of Westfield Academy's newfound peace, was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. 3 months later, Maya received an unexpected visitor at the Self-Defense Club's after-school training session. Detective Sarah Martinez from the Phoenix Police Department had been following the viral videos and the subsequent changes at Westfield Academy with professional interest. As someone who specialized in youth crime prevention, she recognized the unique opportunity that Maya's program represented. "Miss Chun," Detective Martinez said as the training session concluded, "I've been watching what you've accomplished here, and I'm impressed. We've seen a 30% reduction in youth violence reports in this district since your program began." Maya wiped the sweat from her forehead with a towel, her breathing still elevated from demonstrating advanced grappling techniques to the club's senior members. The group had grown to over 60 students, requiring them to split into multiple skill levels and training times throughout the week. "That's encouraging to hear," Maya replied. "But we're just teaching people to protect themselves. The real change comes from creating a culture where violence isn't acceptable." Detective Martinez nodded approvingly. "Exactly, which is why I wanted to discuss an opportunity with you. The department is launching a community outreach program focused on violence prevention in schools. We're looking for young people who can connect with at-risk youth in ways that traditional authority figures cannot." The proposition intrigued Maya, but she also understood the implications of becoming more publicly involved in law enforcement initiatives. Her family's martial arts had always operated in the shadows, and increased visibility brought both opportunities and risks. What would that involvement look like? Maya asked, settling onto a bench while her club members cleaned up the training equipment around them. "Workshops in other schools, community presentations, maybe even some consultation on policy development," Detective Martinez explained. "You've proven that peer education can be more effective than top-down mandates. We want to scale that success across the entire district." Maya's mind raced through the possibilities and challenges such an expansion would present. Training one school's worth of students was manageable, but district-wide influence would require resources, support systems, and a level of organization that went far beyond what she had experience with. "I'd need to discuss this with my grandmother," Maya said finally. "And I'd want to ensure that any program maintains the philosophical foundations that make our approach effective." Detective Martinez handed Maya her business card. "Of course," Take your time to consider it. But Maya, what you've built here is special. Too special to keep to just one school. That evening, Maya sat with Elena in their garden as the sun set over Phoenix, sharing the detective's proposal and seeking the wisdom that had guided her family for generations. Elena listened thoughtfully, her weathered hands working soil around the base of their tomato plants. Power always seeks to grow, Elena said finally. The question is whether we guide that growth or let it guide us. Your mother faced a similar choice when her research attracted attention from powerful people. She chose to resist that influence, and it may have cost her life. Maya felt a chill despite the warm evening air. Are you saying I shouldn't do it? I'm saying you should understand what you're choosing, Elena replied. Once you become a public figure, you lose the protection of anonymity. There will be people who see your abilities as a threat, others who want to exploit them, and some who will try to destroy what you've built out of fear or jealousy. The weight of Elena's words settled over Maya like a heavy blanket. The simple goal of defending herself against school bullies had evolved into something much larger and more complex than she had ever anticipated. But there's also the potential to help thousands of young people find their own strength, Maya said, voicing the other side of the equation. How many kids are out there right now, suffering the way I was, who could benefit from what we've learned? Elena's smile was both proud and sad. That is the eternal burden of the Chun women, little one. We see suffering that we have the power to address, and we must choose between our own safety and our responsibility to others. Over the following weeks, Maya found herself pulled in multiple directions as word of her success continued to spread. College recruiters visited regularly, offering full scholarships to universities across the country. Youth organizations invited her to speak at conferences and workshops. Media outlets requested interviews about her revolutionary approach to bullying prevention. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, reached out after observing several of Maya's training sessions at Westfield Academy. What you're doing here goes far beyond self-defense, Dr. Foster explained during their meeting in the school's counseling office. You're teaching psychological resilience, emotional regulation, and healthy boundary setting. These are therapeutic techniques that typically require years of professional training. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I'm just sharing what my grandmother taught me about protecting yourself and others, which suggests that your grandmother is a remarkably wise woman, Dr. Foster said with a smile. But Maya, you're dealing with students who have experienced significant trauma. Some of the techniques you're using could be incredibly beneficial, but they could also be harmful if not applied properly. The conversation opened Maya's eyes to aspects of her work that she hadn't fully considered. Many of the students drawn to her self-defense club were indeed trauma survivors, victims of bullying, abuse, or violence who were seeking not just physical protection, but emotional healing. Dr. Foster offered to provide additional training in trauma-informed teaching methods, helping Maya understand how to recognize and respond to the psychological needs of her students. The collaboration between martial arts philosophy and therapeutic psychology proved to be incredibly powerful, creating a more comprehensive approach to empowerment and healing. Meanwhile, the legal aftermath of the parking lot confrontation continued to unfold. Vince Romano's assault charges had led to a deeper investigation into the organized harassment campaigns that had been targeting vulnerable students not just at Westfield, but at schools throughout the Phoenix area. What investigators discovered was a disturbing pattern of coordinated bullying that extended far beyond typical teenage cruelty. Several students came forward with evidence of a social media network that had been systematically identifying and targeting victims across multiple schools. The operation included not just Brianna's crew, but a dozen other students from wealthy families who treated the psychological destruction of their peers as a form of entertainment Maya found herself called upon to testify in several legal proceedings. Her expertise in recognizing and responding to bullying tactics became invaluable evidence in the prosecution's case. The experience was emotionally draining but also deeply satisfying, as she watched the systematic nature of the harassment being exposed and condemned. Your courage in fighting back didn't just save yourself, Assistant District Attorney Lisa Park explained during one of their preparation sessions. It exposed a network of abuse that had been operating unchecked for years. Dozens of victims are finally getting justice because you refuse to stay silent. The trials also revealed disturbing information about the circumstances surrounding Maya's parents' death. During the investigation into the social media harassment network, detectives uncovered communications suggesting that Grace Chun's research into illegal medical experiments had indeed made her a target. While the evidence wasn't sufficient for criminal charges, it confirmed Elena's suspicions about the true nature of the accident. This revelation brought both closure and renewed grief for Maya and Elena. Knowing the truth about Grace's death validated their long-held suspicions, but it also meant accepting that they lived in a world where pursuing justice could be deadly. Your mother died protecting other people, Elena told Maya as they processed the devastating information together. She could have stayed silent about what she discovered, but she chose to speak out because she believed in doing what was right, regardless of the personal cost. The parallel between Grace's choice and Maya's current situation was impossible to ignore. Both had discovered their ability to protect others, and both faced pressure to either expand their influence or retreat into safety. As Maya's senior year at Westfield Academy drew to a close, she faced several life-changing decisions. Harvard University had offered her a full scholarship to study psychology and criminal justice, with the understanding that she would continue developing her innovative approaches to violence prevention. The Phoenix Police Department had formalized their offer for her to lead a district-wide youth empowerment program. Several publishing companies had approached her about writing a book documenting her methods and philosophy. But perhaps the most significant opportunity came from an unexpected source. Master Liu Wei, a renowned martial arts instructor who had known Maya's great-grandmother during their youth in Taiwan, traveled to Phoenix specifically to meet with Maya and Elena. "I have been watching the videos of your granddaughter's techniques," Master Liu told Elena during their private conversation in Mandarin, which Maya could partially understand. "She moves with the grace of Li Mei, but she has developed applications that even our ancestors did not envision." Master Liu's school in San Francisco had been training elite martial artists for over 40 years, producing students who went on to become bodyguards for world leaders, trainers for special forces units, and masters in their own right. He offered Maya the chance to study advanced techniques that had been preserved by only a handful of practitioners worldwide. "The Chun family arts were always meant to evolve," Master Liu explained to Maya directly. "Each generation should add their own wisdom to what came before. You have already begun this process, but there is so much more you could learn and contribute." The offer represented a chance to deepen Maya's understanding of her heritage while also preparing her to carry the family's martial knowledge into the future. But it would also mean leaving Phoenix. Elena and the community she had worked so hard to build. Elena watched her granddaughter wrestle with these competing opportunities with the patient wisdom of someone who had faced similar crossroads herself. "There is no wrong choice," she said one evening as they shared tea in their garden. "Each path offers its own challenges and rewards. The important thing is that you choose based on your own values and goals, not on what others expect from you." Maya's decision came during the final meeting of the Self-Defense Club's spring semester. As she looked around the room at the 60-plus students who had found their own strength through the program, she realized that her greatest accomplishment wasn't in the techniques she had mastered or the recognition she had received. "This program has taught me that real strength multiplies," Maya told the assembled students. Every person who learns to protect themselves becomes capable of protecting others. Every victim who becomes a survivor can help create new survivors. What we've built here doesn't depend on any one person. It depends on all of us carrying forward the principles we've learned. Jennifer Park, the freshman who had approached Maya after the awards ceremony, raised her hand. "Does that mean you're leaving?" Maya smiled at the girl who had become one of her most dedicated students and was already showing leadership potential of her own. "It means that wherever I go, whatever I do next, the work we've started here will continue. And it means that you and others like you are ready to help lead that continuation." The announcement that Maya would be accepting Harvard's scholarship offer while also working part-time with the Phoenix Police Department's youth program created a framework that honored both her educational goals and her commitment to community service. Master Liu agreed to provide advanced training during summer breaks, allowing Maya to deepen her martial arts knowledge while maintaining her connections to Phoenix. Most importantly, the self-defense program at Westfield Academy would continue, under the joint leadership of Marcus Rivera and Jennifer Park, with Dr. Foster providing ongoing psychological consultation and Elena serving as a wisdom advisor when needed. The graduation ceremony at Westfield Academy that spring was unlike any in the school's history. Maya's valedictory address drew a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes, but it was her demonstration of advanced techniques with the self-defense club that truly captivated the audience. As Maya moved through a carefully choreographed sequence that showcased everything from basic pressure point control to complex throwing techniques, the crowd watched in awed silence. This was the same girl who had been tormented by bullies just 2 years earlier, now moving with the fluid grace of a master martial artist. "Strength isn't about being the toughest person in the room," Maya said as she concluded her demonstration. "It's about being the person who makes everyone else in the room feel safer." That's the legacy I hope we've built here, and that's the principle I'll carry with me wherever life takes me next. The celebration that followed graduation was a community-wide event, with students, teachers, parents, and local officials all gathering to honor not just Maya's individual achievements but the transformation of Westfield Academy's entire culture. Crime statistics, academic performance indicators, and student satisfaction surveys all showed dramatic improvements that correlated directly with the implementation of Maya's anti-bullying initiatives. But for Maya, the most meaningful moment came when Elena presented her with a special gift, a new jade pendant, carved with the same design as her mother's lost necklace, but incorporating symbols representing each generation of Chun women who had contributed to their family's martial legacy. "Your mother's pendant connected you to the past," Elena said as she fastened the chain around Maya's neck. "This one will carry you into the future while honoring all who came before." As Maya prepared to leave Phoenix for her freshman year at Harvard, she carried with her not just acceptance letters and scholarship documents, but the knowledge that she had transformed from victim to protector to teacher to leader. The bullies who had grabbed her throat in that school parking lot had intended to break her spirit, but instead they had awakened a force that would spend decades empowering others to find their own strength. The Chen family legacy of protection and healing had found its newest guardian, and Maya Chun was ready to carry that responsibility into whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The girl who had once hidden behind her hair and hoped to remain invisible had become a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of cruelty. And in schools across Phoenix, in community centers and youth programs, in the careful notes that Dr. Foster took during her research into trauma-informed empowerment techniques, the ripple effects of Maya's transformation continued to spread, touching lives and changing futures in ways that would be felt for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.